And that's where the money's buried. So between you and me,
I have to say your secret is safe with me for now.
I've got everybody, welcome to Sunday night, the Sunday service. I've ordered Drew to actually take a night off. I think he frankly needs a bit of a rest at the moment. And I mean that most sincerely. So we've drafted in this young man to assist us this evening. Well, how are we, Mr. Pollard?
I've got to say, before we start, I love the HTV West. I thought that was just lovely. I've got to say, I appreciate why you've put that on there. Are we going to go through all of them? Are we going to go through ATV as well, and Thames TV and all of these?
The Thames Television, London Bridge. Yeah, we are going to be working our way through classic television station idents of the 70s and 80s, mostly the 70s, actually.
I've got to say, I'm not sure which is my favourite. I do like the ITV one, not the ITV one, the ATV one. I kind of like that one, but I do like the Thames Television one. I think that's quite spectacular.
If I didn't think Jamie Anderson would sue me, I'd probably use the Century 21 Arrow as well. You know,
oh yes, yeah, probably best not to do that unless you've got deep pockets or friends within the Anderson organisation.
I might have the latter. I might have a quick word. We've already got the people already joining in. ATV, Anthony Bird, Jeff Baker, London Weekend Television. I got to say, I think probably Thames Television.
Yeah, I have to say as well, Tyne Tees Television was a good one. That was one from my youth, from going up to stay at my grand's in Darlington. That was always a good one as well. I kind of like the Thames Television one. And yeah, it's just very funny. Made me laugh, I have to say. And I have to say as well that Precious Little does these days.
Yes. Well, that's what we aim to do, is try and
just add some brevity to the car crash that we're currently watching.
If I could actually do the Metro Goldwyn Mayer thing with me actually as the lion going raw, I'd do it. That would probably eat up time and resources for a week. So
please do, though. It has to be said. Anyway, welcome everybody to the we're going to talk about the oddest television intros ever channel. I hope you're going to enjoy the next hour of us bleating on endlessly. Caught up with a little bit of Blake Seven last night for the first time in a while, I have to say. I'm sort of watching bits and bobs of season 2, and I'd forgotten how dark it was.
I binge watched it this time last year on BritBox. I started from the beginning and worked my way through it, and yeah, it's pretty bleak. It's
really bleak, I have to say. Yeah, and also at the risk of sort of sounding like a strangely odd middle-aged man, which both of us unashamedly are, I do have a slight crush on Servalan. I have to say, she is.
Yes.
Yeah, she is very good in that, and plays it so much with her tongue in her cheek that it's almost comedically genius as you're kind of watching it.
I must admit, within a couple of weeks, I was literally answering the telephone in my best Paul Darrow voice. I was just, it's the way he talks. It's the way he's got it's like Roger Moore. He has a certain way of speaking like this, Villa. We will go there and we will investigate. It's like that kind of cadence to the way he speaks.
Does he? Is it a bit like? I'm not sure that you've seen Hinterland, but in Hinterland, the main character in that, the police officer, doesn't smile for the entire 3 seasons, and I get the feeling that he doesn't smile in Blake 7 at all, does he?
No, Avon smiles, and when Avon
Oh, does he?
smiles, you should be even more terrified.
Oh, right, okay. I must have kind of missed that. I also, while we're on the subject of 1970s science fiction, I've also been sort of catching up with UFO as well, which is also deeply bleak in places. I watched the one in which his son dies, and it's just like,
Spoilers.
Well, everybody's probably watched this by now. If you haven't, where have you been for the last 50 years? But it is extraordinarily bleak, that episode, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember watching that as a kid and just being almost traumatized by it, because you're so used to kind of watching kind of, you know, kind of like a lot of imported shows. I was watching it was kind of like you know, I think the only thing I had was Star Trek as like a comparison, but that tended to have kind of like neatly resolved endings. Or watching a lot of the cop shows I used to like, they tended to have neatly resolved endings, and that kind of like happy, snappy freeze frame that Police Squad lampooned. And here was UFO, and that episode, it's like, well, of course his son is going to survive, because, you know, because that's how television.
That's sort of what happens, isn't it?
Neatly wrap up.
It
doesn't, and it's like,
no, it really doesn't. And I made the mistake of watching, because they show it on Forces TV, don't they? And I made the mistake of watching it at I think it was on at 11 o'clock at night, so it was very late by the time I finished watching. I was watching it in bed, and I got to the end of it. I was like, yeah, I really don't want to sleep now. That's kind of put me off going to sleep. And we all watch these TV programs. For anybody that's watching this, this isn't going to be about us talking about sort of television programs, but this will lead neatly on to a project that I've been working on this week. So there is some method in this slight madness. So you're kind of watching it, and everybody watches UFO or Thunderbirds or Blake 7 to a degree, but not quite so much. But those sort of programs for the spaceships, you watch it for the hardware, don't you, and all of that kind of stuff. And I still am convinced that UFO has at least one, possibly two of the greatest pieces of science fiction design ever. Maybe three. I don't know. We may differ on that, but I'm certainly going to go with Skydiver is obviously one. The Shadow Mobiles are two. In fact, the Shadow Mobile may well be in the top 2 greatest science fiction designs ever in anything. Ever. And then I have to say that I'm sure that you're going to say one of the interceptors, but I rather like the satellite, which I can't remember what it's called now. I like Sid. I think the Space Intruder Detector is pretty good. I kind of like that. But you sort of watch it for that, but you forget about a lot of these programs. I know you're a big fan of Star Trek, but I think you forget about a lot of these programs that amidst all of that hardware that we all love, there are really good stories. And in UFO, there were really good stories. It was very well written, but it wasn't written for a kids' audience.
One of the criticisms that came from, we'll start the show in a minute, folks, don't worry. One of the criticisms that came from ITC's office in America about UFO was that they didn't like the soap opera elements of it, you see. But that, I think, is the thing that plays into its strength. There is an entire episode telling the backstory to the creation of Shadow and how Straker's marriage falls apart. And there's no visual effects in that episode. It is purely backstory, character, soap opera. But I just think that was brilliant. They took a risk and said, we're going to do this. When you get towards the end of the series, because there was a break in production, which is why George Sewell disappears and Wanda Ventham turns up. Her character reoccurs towards the end of the series. When you get to the last batch of episodes, and I think they changed studio as well, not only do they get problematical when it came to scheduling, because there were very adult themes going on in them, but more and more Shadow is becoming compromised until you get to the very last episode. And I know it's hard to say, can they get any bleaker than A Question of Priorities, but it ends on a really bum note. And it's like, okay, and I can see how it alienated people at the time, because it was way ahead of its time in terms of the themes it was dealing with. And oddly enough, those of you tuning in tonight, on one of the channels, I think it's the horror channel in the UK at the moment, they're actually showing Journey to the Far Side of the Sun tonight.
Well, there you go.
Which is the precursor to the UFO in so many ways.
And the reason why we're talking about science fiction and everything is that this week, and John has got some images of it. I've actually been working on a brand new science fiction model.
Yeah, let's jump into that now, shall we?
Let's try and link these things together and make it seem like that we know what we're talking about and make this sound like a Ross Noble night at the theatre, which I probably talk about later on, which is the most extraordinary thing I've probably ever seen. And this is it, as you can see on the screen. This is Revell's brand new 1/72nd scale, I think it is, Razor Crest from The Mandalorian. And this is one of those models, and we sort of come back to the idea of hardware and everything. The Razor Crest is almost as much of a character in The Mandalorian as The Mandalorian and Baby Yoda that sort of carry through the various episodes of the 2 seasons, I think, have been there. And it's a very distinctive kind of design. And John and I are fascinated by the idea of this ship and its place within the kind of canon of Star Wars for a number of reasons. And what we would suggest you do if you get a chance, there is actually a video, I think it's about 15 minutes long. And it discusses in detail how this model came to be and why, in fact, they use a model in The Mandalorian rather than using just CGI. And what they did is they turned the clock back to the ideas that they used for the original trilogy, and that's what happened.
Well, it's actually even more bizarrely interesting than that, because it was Jon Favreau, the producer of the series, wanted a model.
Yes,
and that wasn't going to happen because the idea was they were going to do it all CGI. And
when he says he wanted a model, he wanted the model for his office.
Yes,
that's what he actually wanted, the miniature.
Yeah, and they ended up kind of like 3D printing one from the actual CGI, kind of like CAD design. And it was from there, a couple of people within ILM went, it'd be kind of nice if we actually did shoot some models for this particular gig. And it was John Knoll, the man who invented Photoshop, incidentally, went back to his basement and literally machined a motion control rig. And more people at ILM were popping and going, you're doing this with models, are you? Well, we want in on that. And before you know it, for a majority of the beauty shots in the show, and ones that needed kind of like close-ups, they would use the motion control model.
Yes.
And it had such an impact on the show that you've even had Phil Tippett was returned to do some actual go motion work in the series, actual practical go motion work. And for the second season, one of the Imperial spaceships is a miniature.
Yes.
And I mean, I haven't seen The Mandalorian yet. I've only seen kind of clips of it because I will do the Disney thing in the new year. But just the aesthetic and everything, it looks fabulous. And actually, we can't cover this on this show, but the whole thing where they're shooting location work using these giant LED screens is
it's phenomenal,
mind blowing.
It is. Yeah. And the actual model in the program is not that big. It's 24 inches long. So from tip to tip, it's 2 feet. And the Revell kit is not much less than half that size. So you get a fair idea of the sort of detail that you're getting on there. I think there's going to be a couple of different kits of this coming out. I see, it seems to think that AMT are bringing one out as well. But so far it's a really nice model. John found this photograph. This is actually, I think, possibly from the video that I spoke about a couple of minutes ago, and you can kind of see how this thing weathered, and also how different it is from the normal models that are used in Star Wars. Because one of the things about it is it's silver in finish. It's actually silver foiled in reality. If you watch the video, it looks like they're putting foil on it, but then it's covered in what looks like kind of oil paint deposits. So my trick for this week is, and I have to have this model built, photographed, written up, and delivered in 10 days. I had it on Thursday. It's got to be with Marcus at the end of next week. So that gives you an indication of how fast I've got to make this. And I haven't started painting it yet. I've sort of done all of the base coats, but I haven't brought it together to paint and weather it. And I've got to try and recreate that in some way. So off air, we were discussing how I would go about doing that. And my sort of plan at the moment is to spray it with a spray can, because that's quick. So spray it with a spray can, and then what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to try and create that kind of grey patina that you can see all over this with actually neat oil paints rather than washes. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the whole model from tip to toe in neat. I'm thinking of using Payne's grey, maybe neat Payne's grey, but also Payne's grey mixed with some white and some raw umber, sort of in different sort of areas over the model. Paint the whole thing in oil paints, and then rub the oil paint off to reveal the detail underneath, and hope that the sort of texture of the paint gives me an indication of sort of dust and dirt and grime and that kind of thing. And then maybe once I've got that in place, and hopefully it won't take too long to dry, then I'll sort of overspray it with sort of, you know, streaking and all of those kind of things and everything. So this is going to be a model that's painted in its entirety like I would paint a figure's face in oil paints over a base layer of acrylics. And you can see from how big this thing is from those pictures that it's going to take quite a lot of oil paint. I think I'm going to be using some very large brushes for this. And also I'm going to have to work really quickly with it as well, because if I start at one end, by the time I get to the other end using oil paints, it's going to start to not fully dry, but it's certainly going to start to sort of harden off. But that's my plan of action, I think, with this.
I'd use boot polish.
Yeah, we said, I mean, boot polish would probably work, but I'm thinking that boot polish might be a bit dark, but boot polish would work just as well, and actually rub that in. And Martin Bauer, when he paints his models, when he was weathering, building and painting the models for Alien and that kind of thing, what he would use is soot. He would brush soot onto the surface of the model. It's difficult to know how they've gone about weathering this thing, but it's definitely got that kind of patina to it. But you can see in this image here as well that this is a model that doesn't have a lot of different panels in it. Certainly not a lot of. It's not like a natural metal aircraft where you've got different panels that you can work with. It's very, very different from that. But I like it. I think it's a great looking. It's so utilitarian. It's really great. You know.
And one of the things we were talking about before we came on air, and this is certainly something ILM did when they started doing Rogue One 5 years ago, is in order to recreate the Imperial Star Destroyers as CG models, they ended up scanning loads of kit parts and actually built up a digital library of kit parts for detailing. So they could then build their Star Destroyers and their other models, but they could go in there and actually drop in these kit components like they would have when they were building physical models. So I know you mentioned about the Revell kit, that it looks like there's bits on there that are identifiably bits of model kits, and I get the feeling I'll ask my name drop, I'll ask my ILM people, but I get the feeling that's probably what happened with the Razor Crest, is that when it was originally built as a digital model, they were dropping kit parts in there from a digital library of actual scanned kit parts.
Yeah, it's certainly possible, because that's definitely, when you look at it, there are definitely parts on there, but also there are parts on there where you think, I recognize that part, but it's bigger than I remember it. So it is possible that, like you say, they've used those parts, but enlarged them up or reduced them down depending on the space. But one of the things about this model that's interesting as well is, and shows how clever the designers and the builders of the model were in the first place, is there are asymmetric details on this. If you go back to the picture that you showed at the front there, you can see the two engine nacelles. The one on the left is different to the one on the right. It's got a cutout in its left-hand edge, which the other one doesn't have. So they weren't sort of keen just to have stock parts where everything was mirrored from one side to the other. So when you're looking at it, you can go, oh yeah, that's actually slightly different. They've actually thought about a detail and put that in a place that most people would kind of ignore. And that's also why Revell's kit is so impressive, because that cutout is actually in the kit part as well. So they've they've not gone for 2 engine fronts and had them identical that just sit on the front of the nacelles. They've actually got that cutout in there, and that detail is mirrored, in kind of a miniature of a miniature. And they've certainly done their homework on this. And I think that when people see it complete, you can see the cutout in the ring that's at the sort of the lower edge of that picture. And I think that when people see this model, they're going to compare it to the model that was in the Mandalorian itself and be quite impressed. So yeah, so overall, really nice. It's a good little kit to do. It would have been, like everything, it would be nice to have a bit more time to spend on this thing, but it's what it is. I've got a job to do, and it's got to go. It's got to get out there, and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, all good.
Just imagine you're actually having to finish it for filming. There you go. There's a bit of inspiration for you.
Yes.
Imagine you're actually working at the ILM workshop, or Kernet Optical as it used to be known, and you've got to get that finished because the cameras are rolling on Friday.
Yeah, it's just got to be done and got to be out there. And it is one of those things that I think is sort of interesting to talk about when people are discussing kit reviews and that kind of thing. And I think these days with kit reviews, there tends to be longer between delivery and delivery. Delivery of the kit, delivery of the article. And I remember we often reference scale models on this show, and there was a modeler that worked with whose name I think was Rob Jones. I think his name was Rob Jones, and he worked for scale models in the 70s and everything. And there's some sort of interesting asides that he puts in there. One of them is that he delivered the model, finished the model this morning, and delivered it to be photographed on a Friday afternoon, getting out of the taxi outside of the editorial offices, the model still being wet, the paint still being wet in his hands, bearing in mind at that time models were painted in enamels, so he could feel that the paint was still tacky underneath because he'd only been given a week to put this thing together. So it's sort of interesting when you're put in that position, that sort of professional position, for want of a better description, but you're put in that professional position, that you don't have the time to really sort of think about what you're doing. I have no time with this model to sit there and go, yeah, how shall I do this again? How am I going to paint this? It's basically I'm working on instinct now with this model, instinctively working out how I'm going to create an effect that looks cool on in the pictures. And I described this I've described this before on this channel. I've described it on my videos, described it in books and everything. I have my job, your job as well, to a degree, although not quite so much. But my job is to build 3-dimensional objects to take 2-dimensional images. That's my job. And my models only exist for one reason and one reason only, and that's to go onto the page of a book to be shown to other people who can then look at the pictures and go, I'd like to build that. That's the only reason. They're not there to be seen in the round. I don't really do a lot of model shows these days, and I don't compete anymore because frankly it's the most hellish experience of my life, and I never want to go through that again. So they only really exist for that reason. So a bit like Aliens when they did the Sulaco, and the Sulaco in Aliens is only one-sided because it goes, which way does it go? That way. Goes past the camera that way. You only see that side of the model, and the other side is completely undetailed. It's a bit like that with doing this. So it's a fascinating kind of thing, how you sometimes have to approach these things, or don't weather the underside, or as I've done before in the past, don't decal the side away from the camera or the underside and only photograph it from one side because you've run out of time.
Just going off slightly on a tangent there, but again, talking about painting and finishing or whatever, rather ironically, given the amount of time and effort that went into painting the Enterprise model for the very first Star Trek film, which is a beautiful paint job. It's just it's all that layers of pearlescent Aztec kind of detail. It's stunning. It's stunning. But they painted the entire model top to bottom. Everything on that model was finished to an incredible high degree of detail. But when you watch the film, they only ever film it from the port side. It's only ever passing on screen. When you're looking at the screen, you only ever see it passing on screen from right to left. You never see the starboard side of it. You only see the starboard side actually in Star Trek 2, but when they actually film at a different angle. Anyway,
it's a funny thing, isn't it, though, that when we do things, and I know that you've said this before, you've talked about this when you've been sort of building models for the hobby company, for instance. You know, if they've got an interior, I know we've had conversations, usually in in your Mini on the way back from a sort of a cafe or whatever. We've talked about these things and how but I like to do that. I'll take some photographs of it, and it's kind of, I feel that it does the model kind of justice and everything. And I think that that's absolutely the right way that people should approach it. And I think certainly hobbyists should absolutely approach it in that way. I think the difference is that if you're time constrained with these things, my book, which we'll talk about later, but in there I build the Airfix Wellington. The Airfix Wellington is the first model I can recall where the instructions explicitly say you don't have to build all of this interior detail, because the vast majority of it you'll never see when the model's finished. They actually say that in the instructions. They have like a double page spread in there saying this bit here you can ignore completely, because it'll just, all you'll see is the sort of the cockpit and the inside of the turrets. Ignore the rest. And I built the whole thing, and I do mention it in there. I say, I did it because I wanted to see what it looked like and all of that sort of stuff. But I guarantee you, if I was to ever build another Wellington, an Airfix Wellington, I'd leave all that out. Probably what I'd do is I'd just reproduce the other photographs and go, here you go, this is what it looks like if you kind of put it in. But it's that sort of thing of sort of speed. And I hear sort of modelers say, rightly, and I will say this, but I know it's there, and my attitude to that is, but I don't care.
Andy Brennan says, Airfix 24 scale Hellcat for Telford, 5 weeks, no instructions.
I don't even know how that's possible, to be honest. Honestly, Andy, I really, that's truly an extraordinary achievement. It's an extraordinary achievement to build the model in 5 weeks with instructions, having done it. But without, how did you work it out? How did you work out where those parts went? I mean, that's like the most difficult three-dimensional jigsaw I've ever seen in my life.
21 years ago, goodness me, 21 years ago. Let's all pause to just consider that passage of time. I built 2 24 scale Airfix Harriers, the GR1s, and they turned up as just plastic bits, because that was needed for Telford. Was it Telford or Castle Donington back then? One or the other. And I had no instructions. I was literally looking at bits thinking, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I was going, well, they seem to match.
Click.
Glue. That one, okay, that seems to line up. Glue it together. Ian Rusco says, I had 5 weeks to build a 1/350th scale Tirpitz and Royal Navy heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk for Beeb documentary on disaster of Arctic convoy PQ-117, hosted by Mr. Clarkson, and did it in just 4 weeks and a few days. It's and Mike Williams actually says, I quite enjoy building under pressure. It focuses the mind. Well, and we've done that with our old challenges, haven't we? It is a good way.
It does focus the mind. There's no two ways about it. I mean, Razor Crest doesn't have any instructions. It doesn't have any decals either. So it really is a test shot. And actually, some of the parts are mismolded, I noticed. So there is going to be sort of some issues with that. It does focus the mind, and I did a lot of commission work when I moved back to where I live now 20 years ago in 98. No, slightly over 20 years ago now. I moved back here. I was doing commission work for a company, and I think I've told this story before. And the year that broke the camel's back, as it were, I did 95 models in 12 months. And at one point, I was turning out 5 models a day, start to finish, and I just got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I just this is bonkers. I was doing like 144 scale. So I tell the story of the rig, don't I, which I've told on here before. 24 scale Ferrari truck that I built. I had no recollection of building it at all. The model was handed over sort of to me in a glass display case, and I said, "Oh, that looks really good." And I to this day, I can't tell you, I can't remember putting it together or painting it. And you would think you'd remember something like that, but I think at that point I was so sleep deprived, and I just thought, no, I'm not going to do this again. But it's a tough thing, really. And a friend of mine, the late Derek Holmes, who was a brilliant sculptor, he was also a painter. He painted toy soldiers. And he worked for like the Britons, remember those collectible toy metal soldiers and all that sort of stuff. Worked for a company that did those. He was painting at one time something like 50 figures a day. 50 a day. And he was on like piecework, and it was like a production line. And he was just doing all of this kind of stuff and everything. And it got to the point where he just physically couldn't cope with the demands of it, and you sort of forget how quick I mean, I'm relatively quick at what I do and everything, but once you get to 53, your energy levels drop. When I could do this when I was 25, because I could stay awake for 18 hours rolling weeks, days and weeks and stuff. But you can't really do that when you're 53. I get to like 5 o'clock and I'm like, yeah, I've had enough of looking at this workbench now. I think I'm going to go and play on the PlayStation or watch football or something like that.
Well, so speak for yourself, old darling. Some of us are a year older and we're still flying away. Got a comment here from Gary Welsh. I think Gary, I think something got garbled in our communication here. But Gary says, no, the Enterprise was built for a series of movies. It was small it needed to be at 8-foot. Trumbull, that's Douglas Trumbull, wanted 12-foot. From what I remember of that, I think it was built by Magicam. And the effects were originally being done by, it was another effects house, and the name escapes me. They did a lot of adverts in America. And after months and months and months of nothing, they finally showed some work, and the producers just went, we can't use this. I'm trying to remember what the name of the studio was anyway. But yeah, Douglas Trumbull said he would have preferred to have had that model built slightly bigger, but they were stuck with it. But the point I was making was that it was painted beautifully all round. It was absolutely marvelous, but it was only ever for the first film, only ever filmed from the port side. You never see it from the other side. Gary also says, I'm afraid building kits professionally, building for TV, film industry are completely different animals. Absolutely. Yep. Round 2, turn around for review 4 weeks, no instructions, no decals. Yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
4 weeks, that much?
4 weeks. Well, well, exactly. I've just said that, this one is 10 days. They can be shorter than that. When I've been in this now a long time, so I've sort of seen it all. But when I was with Milashinsky, when I first started there in '96 and everything, I was turning out 2 or 3 models a month at that point. So you're only getting kind of weeks to do those. But yeah, I appreciate that it's a different kind of thing, but it's also fundamentally a different discipline as well, because film miniatures, I'm sorry to say, and you can shout me down if you want, but film miniatures on the whole aren't built to the same standards as miniatures that are built for you to look at close up. When you look at the film, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I think if you see, if you're building something that, if you look at a science fiction miniature or something like that, hobbyists will build it to a higher standard than the modelers that are building it for films. If you look at the I think it's called Sculpting a Galaxy, which is the Star Wars coffee table book. If you look at the models that are in there that were in Star Wars, those models are really rough in places. Whereas, they would put the panels on them and cut all the panels out and put all the detail and all of those kind of things onto those models. Whereas a modeler, we would sand things down to make them smooth and all of that. There's no evidence of that happening in those miniatures at all. So it is a different discipline, and you can't compare the two. They're for different reasons. One is to look at closely, either for shows or in a magazine or on screen or whatever. One is to be fleetingly seen, crossing a screen, and it may be on screen for only a few seconds or something. That's the difference, fundamental kind of. Yeah. We are very much aware of that.
Anthony Bird comes to the rescue. I was just going to say it was Robert Abel and Associates that did. Well, they were initially engaged to do the visual effects for Star Trek the Motion Picture,
Yeah.
and they were moved on. But that's the point. I would, I think one of the rare exceptions to something that looks absolutely stunning in real life, beyond what was actually needed on the screen, and that was that Enterprise miniature for Star Trek the Motion Picture, because it's just, honestly, that finish is just, it's mind-blowing. It really is. But
I mean, you can sort of see that in action, can't you, in Space 1999, when you look at the Eagles that were made, the 44-inch Eagles that were made for the first season. When you see photographs of those originals, when they before they started filming with them, they were really beautiful, weren't they? They were really lovely models. But by the time they finished, they altered them, they'd added detail, they'd repainted chunks of them. Martin Bauer, in his in one of the books, when he's talking about the Hawk model that he made, the 22-inch Hawk, it was originally delivered in white because that matched the Eagles, and then they decided that white made them look too much like the Eagles, so they painted the beak and then the front end of the engines in orange. And then it was pointed out that actually most people at that time were probably watching TV on black and white TV sets. So it made absolutely no difference whatsoever. But also they put sort of a cannon effect, a gun effect, into the beak of the Hawk, and so that it flashed. And when they glued it back on off center. So that model, which is still extant now, it still exists. The beak is slightly kinked, and he says in the little book that he did about it, he said, "Wasn't my fault. It was square when I sent it to them, but they broke it and they glued it back on the wrong sort of angle." Just before we move on to talking about some new kits that have come out, did you see that auction that came out this week? They're auctioning off memorabilia. Did I send you the link for the Eagle? 44-inch original Eagle 1, I think it was, from Space 1999, which has been restored back to sort of somewhere close to original form by David Sissons, is going up for auction, or has been up for auction. I think it's going up for auction, actually. And the reserve price on this model, for anybody that wants to buy it, is between £80,000 and £120,000 for the original 44 Eagle 1, between £80,000 and £120,000, and which is going to make somebody an awful lot of money. Because I think what David has done, he's restored it, but he's left certain areas on the model, so that when, I think under one of the landing pads is one of the areas that he's not touched. He's made sure that it still looks like an original. So yeah, so if you wanted to buy a piece of Jerry Anderson history, that model is up for sale, and it'll cost you between £80,000 and £120,000.
Yeah, I think I might think about.
How much you got? I got
2p.
Hang on a minute. I've got £4.20.
Hang about. Tell a lie. I've got £1, £2, £3.60, and a bounty wrapper. So
actually, I tell a lie. I've got £4.45.
Okay.
So we're getting there, aren't we? You know, we could crowdfund it.
We could probably afford a kit part of it.
We could afford some of the tubing that goes on it. So
I will just to round off this rambling thing about, because we could talk about models and visual effects. We will do another show. We'll do another one about models and visual effects at some stage. Our interesting thing to round this off, actually, two interesting things. First of all, is just to finish off with Eagles and Star Wars, is that the original design for the Millennium Falcon was going to be a long spaceship, and they looked at it and they went, "It looks too much like the Eagles from Space 1999."
And it does when you see it.
And they went, "Yeah, it does, doesn't it?" So they came up with the famous asymmetrical hamburger. It is the Millennium Falcon. The original design for the Millennium Falcon was reworked, and it became the Revel blockade runner you see at the beginning of the film, the very first spaceship you see in Star Wars,
which is another iconically beautiful design, isn't it? But not quite as good as the Shadow mobiles, which are
and hopefully, fingers crossed, for the Festival of Modelling coming up in a few weeks' time. We are actually hoping to have as one of our live guests is somebody who actually worked for ILM and worked on some quite iconic bits of stuff that you all know. So, like I say, fingers crossed, we are going to have them on the show, and it's not Roy for a change. So,
good, right, fair enough. Right, moving on. Yes.
Oh, do you want to do your book, or we'll do the news?
We'll do that later. We'll do the news, yeah. So here we are. Two bits of Edward news this week, which have completely taken everybody by surprise, because Edward seem to have done a Tamiya and kept their two new families of projects under wraps. The first one being this one, the A6M20. This one is they've under the heading of Tora, as you can see it there. It's one of the sort of earlier ones from Pearl Harbor, which is in the wonderfully, I think, sort of characteristic pale grey colour scheme as well, which I really, really like. This looks like a really good release, doesn't it, from Edward? I think this is a very sensible move from them to go to sort of go away from doing kind of American and German subjects to doing the Zero. It should be said that it has the superlative Tamiya Zero kit also in its sights. So it'd be interesting to see how good this is in comparison to that spectacular release that Tamiya offered the sort of modelling world however many years ago, like 5-6 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, I would think. There's nothing more that we can show you from this kit other than these are going to be the colour schemes. They're all essentially the same. They are as they are, variations in trim. But if these renders are anything to go by, the surface detail on this is going to look really, really impressive. And I'm assuming as well, going by what we've seen from other Edward kits recently, FW190, Spitfire family, P51 Mustang in particular, this is going to be really popular. And also, I think it's going to go together really beautifully as well. It certainly looks the part, doesn't it? And for such a famous aircraft, there haven't been hundreds of Zero kits in 48 scale over the years. So I think this is a good introduction. I mean, we're assuming, aren't we, that there's going to be a family of these things rather than just a one-off. Edward aren't known for producing one subvariant and then leaving it at that, like Tamiya. They tend to sort of bring out one and then do sort of bunches of others. So I would imagine that in the box there's going to be parts that aren't related to that particular variant, but will start to give pointers to later versions. As far as Zeros are concerned, I'd like to say I know lots about them. I don't really. I know that they're great looking machines, but I don't know anything specifically about subvariants or anything. I think that's probably one of those minefields akin to slatted wing sabers and those kind of things, which we tend to steer clear of, don't we, if we can at all help it. But this is not the only one that has been released this week, or information that's been announced this week. There's also another one, and that's this one, the Wildcat.
F4, F3 apparently, which is the F4, F3, which I don't think that is widely available. The Tamiya kit I think is an F4, F4, and the Hobby Boss kits I think they're all over the place, so probably best to avoid them. But this is an F4, F3 apparently from Edward, which is very welcome.
Yes, absolutely. The Wildcat is one of those airplanes I've never built a model of. Never built a Wildcat. And well, up until the 24th scale Airfix kit, I've never built a Hellcat until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of an intriguing release for me, and certainly something that I'm sort of looking forward to. And I say sort of looking forward to because there's a caveat with that, as I've discussed, and that is I'm still unsure about how Eduard are producing their decals in their kits, and sort of following discussions about how those decals have appeared and how they've been printed and their application, that kind of thing. I'm a little bit kind of wary of them at the moment, but I'm not sure how wary that's going to make me in the face of wanting to build one of these, because the Wildcat I really like it because it's kind of a pugnacious little thing as well, but also it's got the possibility for lots of detail. Undercarriage bay is one of those things that offers kind of like lots of interesting little details, and also there's weathering and paintwork that sort of goes in its favor. Again, I would imagine that this is the start of a family rather than a one-off. So we'll be looking to sort of to see what Eduard have got planned for this. The other thing with these two kits is as well, you can put your mortgage on the fact that there will be a base plastic kit, there'll be a Profi pack, then there'll be a weekend version of that, and then on top of that there'll be a whole raft of Brassin, Eduard, Etch, and also Zoom and Look add-ons for these kits as well. So you'll probably find that you'll have those sort of basic packages, the basic Profi pack, but then you're going to end up with resin engine bays, resin cockpits, resin wheels within their Brassin range. You'll have Etch for all sorts of things like flaps and internal details, external details. They'll probably give you new instrument panels in their Look series. There'll be masks as well. So the possibility from these two kits to make models that are really, really detailed, I think is going to be available pretty soon after the model gets these models get released. In fact, I would imagine that they'll almost be concurrent releases, so that you'll be able to pick up things as you want. That seems to be their sort of their approach to these kits these days. And also because there's big old radial at the front of that of both of those, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with those Brassin engines, because the FW190 engines that they produced were fabulous things. So do we like those? Do we think that they are good choices in the pantheon of World War II?
I've just got my this is one of my Grumman Wildcat folders I've got here, and apart from lots and lots of lovely things, including back in the day when their archivist was a lady called Lois Lobisolo, you'd write to Grumman and she would send you,
oh wow, look at that,
these fantastic documents, which I don't know if you can see.
Oh, they look good, don't they?
It's fabulous stuff. Diagrams, look at all that.
Plans as well.
These all ended up going up to Hornby at one stage for when they were doing their F4 a few years ago. I got loads of this. Is just part of the Wildcat collection I've got here. But here's the thing: going back in time, this is when we need that wibbly wobbly effect. Is the first model show I ever went to. There's my been looking for that. First model show I ever went to with my mum. Hello, mum. Wokingham Town Hall, and I got this. This is the first ever model magazine publication journal that I ever got. Still have it. There's a surprise. And it's got so many awesome things in here. It has fabulous, because this was like it was a freebie, and they did like the best of bits from IPMS magazines around the world. So, for example, there is a feature from IPMS France on French Corsairs.
Beautiful,
lovely. There is a one from IPMS Finland on that interesting 109, which I actually built in the 80s. But the piece de la Resistance is an article by Wesley Moore on the Wildcat or the Martlet in Fleet Armed Service, and that was my introduction to the Wildcat, and it tells you how to convert the Bell kit and everything. Utterly joyous, utterly joyous. So that is where my love affair with the Wildcat first started. And
so I'm assuming from that you're deeply disappointing and frankly quite shocked that I have never built a Wildcat.
I hide it well.
Or are you just assuming that every time I come on this program, I will disappoint you at some point?
No, I wake up every day and I'm permanently disappointed. I'm actually disappointed to know why this is in my Wildcat box. This is the camouflage and markings book on the P36, the P40, and the P39. I don't know what it's doing in the Wildcat box, but it won't be there for much longer.
I thought you had like a bomb-proof filing system.
I do actually have quite a bomb-proof filing system, but anyway, but yeah, that's good because obviously an F4, F3. I know Hobby Boss did do some F4, F3s, but apparently there are issues. But yeah,
as there often are.
But to have an Edward F4, F3 means I can do Royal Navy martlets. And fantastic. Just another quick thing before we veer off of this is I am minded of the fact that as much as we like to talk about the fantastic surface detail that Edward put into these kits, and it is utterly fantastic, it's actually, you go back 40 years plus, nearly 50 years ago, and you have a look at some of those Otaki kits that came out in the 70s.
Yeah, they were very nice, weren't
they? They are not that far short of this kind of excellence in terms of surface detail.
I mean, they weren't the most accurate of kits.
No,
in some cases, I don't think that's a tough thing to say. But in terms of production quality, they were fabulous, weren't they? And in fact, Airfix released some of those Otaki kits.
They did the Hellcat, the Corsair, and the Spitfire Mark 8 and the Mustang, I seem to remember.
Yes.
And as you say, they're not great replicas, but they are very good kits.
Yeah, I seem to recall building a couple of those. I think I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, it's kind of a weird sort of thing, really. The surface detail is such a personal thing for a lot of people, isn't it? And I mean, which leads us kind of neatly on. It's almost as if this was planned. Which leads me neatly on to something else I've been working on this week, which I can sort of talk about. And that is, I'm working on Hong Kong models, Lancaster, 32nd scale Lancaster. This model is being built for a commission. It's being built. It's going to be delivered in 4 or 5 weeks' time. So I'm kind of working on this. And one of the things that sort of stands out from this model is the beauty of the surface detail on it. It really is exquisite, I think is fairly safe to say. It looks absolutely phenomenal. It's got lots of little rivets. It's beautifully smooth. It's really nice. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not what border models XOV Wingnut Wings Lancaster is going to look like with all of its kind of rippled surface or anything. But in terms of surface detail that fits in with the way that other surface detail is created for other models, a la Tamiya, Hasegawa, those kind of things, Meng, this is very much up there as some of the best I've ever seen. It really is absolutely beautiful. You kind of see that this is the underside, black undersides of this model, and then I've painted. I've done tailplanes and the upper wing of one of these things. It'll sort of stay modular so that I can transport it. I don't really want to be gluing the wings on and transporting it all in one piece, but you can kind of see how this looks. But yeah, the surface detail on this thing is absolutely fabulous, and sort of shows what's possible from these big models. This was something that I've been sort of working on this week. This gives you an indication of the paint finish on it and how degraded this paint finish is. It's sort of as weathered as I can get it. That's not complete yet. That's just the base layers of airbrushed paint and then the base wash. There's no other little effects on that, but there will be when it's completed. There's going to be a load of oil paint spot on top of this to further kind of accentuate the rippling on it, to also add streaking and change some of the wear patterns on this. But that gives you kind of a fair idea. But I have to say, these things are massive to put together. I mean, it's like 1 meter by 1 meter. You can kind of see how big this is. And one of the reasons why I've had to build and paint this in a kind of a modular fashion, because it doesn't fit in my spray booth. It's got to be painted on the table, which is at first. I haven't painted anything like that for a long time. But what I've done with this is the model is actually molded in grey, as many of you are aware. But in order to simplify everything on this, I used Chaos Black spray paint, and I spray painted everything in black, so that way I can cut down on as much masking as possible. So, for instance, all of the fuselage halves are sprayed completely in black on their outer surfaces, and then what I'll do is I'll join them together and then sand the upper and lower seams, and then only touch those bits in, so that around the windows and that kind of thing there won't need to be any kind of masking at all. Also, I aerosol canned the underside of the wings, and then in order to cut down on the amount of actual airbrushing I was doing at the bench, I only sprayed very sort of fine degraded layers over the top of it, so I wasn't covering the whole model. The idea of spraying a model this big with an airbrush in black, you'd just be doing it forever. I can't even conceive of that. And in fact, up until this point, I used 2 full tins of Chaos Black on this just for those primer coats. I mean, that's a huge amount of paint. So it sort of gives you an idea of how it kind of puts it together. Have you? No, not yet. Not yet. But I'm going to be using it in the next week or so, because I've got it's going to be put in for a review. I have had it in my hand, and I've had a bit of a play with it, and I have to say it's absolutely beautiful. It's really small as well. It's a lot smaller than my other airbrushes. Smaller than a HPCH. It's got that kind of like tiny dimension about it, so it fits in your hand perfectly. It's not those new Iwatas are not particularly cheap, I have to say, but they are sensational quality, and that one is really beautiful. They do 2 now, I've noticed. They do a custom micron version of it as well. So they do this one, which is essentially similar to an HPCH, but they also do the custom micron version of it, which looks very similar. That custom micron, the new one, is £500 for an airbrush, which is a lot of money, but it is such a precision instrument. Last year, John and I both bought. I think we both bought both of them, actually, didn't we? We bought some of the Fender airbrushes
this year. Last year, this year.
Was it this year? Was it? I thought it was last year. We bought. Oh, this year. Anyway, we bought these Fender airbrushes, didn't we? And all that sort of stuff. And I still use mine. I've used it. In fact, I used it on that Lancaster wing and all of that kind of stuff. And they're great, and I really, both of us, wholeheartedly recommend brushes like that to people who are starting out, or if you need an extra airbrush or all that sort of stuff. I have to say, hand on heart, you cannot compare a brush like that with a high-end Iwata or Hardman Steenbeck airbrush or any of those. You can't compare the two. They're completely different instruments. They are, one is a high-end, high-spec, very well machined tool that you are, is going to give you excellent results, whereas the other one has certain tolerance issues. When you're using it, it's not as smooth, it doesn't feel the same way, but this new one it's spectacular. I mean, even I've been using Iwatas now for 20 years, almost solidly. And this thing it shows what they can do when they put their mind to it. I would love to get hold of one of those custom icons and just sort of have it in my hand. It's
Two things you just reminded me. One is I need to get your masks off this week, which I will do. So
yes, please do. Yes, I do.
Get your masks off. That's for painting the Lancaster, for the codes and the serials, and also I do need to put my money where my big fat Dudley mouth is, and that's actually go out and buy an Iwata Neo, because people keep saying, people say first airbrush, and I just go Iwata Neo based on other people telling me the Iwata Neos are great little kind of budget airbrushes. But then I think, I do need to go and get one, so that I can actually, come at it with the direct experience. I am still of the opinion that these Fender airbrushes are brilliant. They are utterly brilliant. But I would still recommend somebody to go for a first-time airbrush is get the best that you can afford. And if it means saving up a bit and getting an Iwata or even a Sparmax, the Sparmax ones are very, very good.
Yeah.
But I would still go for I'd start off on the right foot and go with an Iwata, and people say to me, go for an Iwata Neo. But I'm hold my
I like
hand
the
up
Neo.
and say, I'm
It's
just
really good.
parroting what other people say. I need to get one so I can actually say, yeah, they are good.
If you'll allow me, I've got to answer the question now. Gary's put, why do you need a custom micron? I have two, but it's an artist gun, not for model makers. What's the difference? What's the difference? If you're a high-end model maker producing high-end models with high-end finishes on them, what's the difference between one in 3 dimensions and one in 2? I don't see any difference in that. You can't tell me that the guys who are using those airbrushes to paint some of the high-end Games Workshop figures or high-end figurines or whatever, their work is any less complicated, complex, or has less finesse than somebody that's doing it in 2 dimensions. I'm not having that at all. I'm sorry, I'm really not having that. If you've got, just because you work on a model doesn't mean that that finish is any less finessed than somebody who's using that tool to paint on a piece of paper or a piece of card or anything else. There is work out there using these tools that we've seen at shows, that we've seen at the top shows and everything, that use these tools to produce effects on their models that's every bit as good and every bit as complex as the work that you see done by artists. I'm sorry, Gary, but I'm not having that. I'm not having that somehow an artist's, in inverted commas, work has more merit or is inherently more skillful than something done on a miniature. Not having it. I'm really not having it. And any more than I wouldn't have it if somebody said, well, why do you need to go out and buy Series 7 paintbrushes from Winsor & Newton if you're only painting a model? If you're painting a model the same way as the Russian girls are painting their figures, their figures, or some of the Warhammer 40K stuff that I'm following on Twitter, those high-end brushes are going to come into action. But it's the same argument. No, can't have that.
I actually do sort of, I think, I'm probably paraphrasing Gary here, but I think that perhaps what he's suggesting is, and Gary will tell me if I'm getting this wrong, is that the custom micron is more geared towards fine inks, they're kind of really kind of like the watery inks, and they're geared towards something that, to quote my art teacher, who gave me a shellacking after I borrowed the airbrushes from art college and didn't quite clean them out properly, is that they're not designed. They're not designed for what he called airfix paint. And and I think it's that these things are so precise, is that actually a lot of the paints that modelers use, they're the paints, unless you are, you will be, because you are somebody who understands the importance of thinning and pressure ratios and everything. I think for a lot of, I'd say, get me a shovel, I'm digging myself deeper here. I think there is perhaps the scenario that these things are so finessed that people will try putting paint through them that they're really not designed.
I spent a long time using custom micron pudding, and I was putting extra color through it, enamels, thinning it right down, putting that through and being able to glaze over. I used to custom micron for quite a while, painting 54mm figure faces. And using it to sort of lay over those kind of things. Yeah, I agree to a certain degree. I do agree. I wouldn't recommend, a beginner or even an intermediate modeler to go out and buy a custom micron. But the idea that that's what sort of slightly puts me on the back foot is the idea that somehow they're designed for artists, but model makers can't be artists.
I think model makers can use them, but be aware that what you're using there is an instrument which is so finely balanced that anything, there are the chances that if you're trying to kind of like tip certain brands of paint into them is that they may just be a little bit too. Anyway, it's interesting that Gary isn't a Wata dealer, because if he can message us, we'll see if we can cut a deal for a Neo. So
no, but I mean, the thing with that is that you could say that about any of those high-end brushes, couldn't you? You could, that argument, I guess, could take us down the route of certain airbrushes, cheaper airbrushes are designed for specific materials, and you have that. Whereas I don't necessarily think that that's the case. And certainly having used airbrushes professionally for 30 years, give or take, I don't think that argument holds water. In fact, I don't think it holds water at all. I don't sort of have any truck with that at all. But it's just one of those things. But I do agree that you would need a certain degree of skill to be able to get the best from those kind of brushes.
Gary says, an artist is an artist, tools do not make the artist. I absolutely agree with you there. I agree with you there, Gary. And that is that, this is one of the reasons why I've been having fun with my budget £25, £30 airbrushes, is I'm going to be trying to do things beyond what these things are designed to comfortably do.
Yes.
But I want to push the limits of them, so that you can actually say, look, sometimes it's, as we've said before, it's not so much the tool is not going to do the heavy lifting for you, in as much as, and we're going to use that metaphor again, is if I go out, if somebody goes out and buys a 700 quid Brian May guitar, or a thousands of pounds worth Neil Peart drum kit, and they can't play guitar, they can't play the drums, well, that's not going to do it for you.
No, absolutely not.
I think that's probably the parallel to draw with something like a custom micron, is that it's a very precise instrument, but it also requires the person using it to have a degree of skill equal to it. In fact, Drew has chopped in. It's very controversial tonight, isn't this? But I think we all agree generally. Is Drew has chipped in here to say, I dishy for hours. I'm sure he does. Freehanding a Mirage 3. I used a PS711, essentially a custom micron. I simply cannot achieve the level of finish with any other kind of brush I've used. And in fact,
I feel the same way.
Somebody else said earlier on about, it's all kicking off now. Somebody else said about the Andy Brennan said that the Hobby Pro Convoy PS770 is almost as good as a custom micron and much cheaper. So,
well, that's what Drew's the 771 is the one that's above, isn't it? That we've kind of been talking about. Marcus Nichols has used custom microns for years, and I found when I was freehanding. If I was freehanding mottling, especially, I found that I used custom micron a lot for 72nd scale German aircraft to get that model on there, because what I wanted to do, I was kind of, I was trying to sort of bullseye model that was only a millimeter across without any overspray. And I couldn't do that with any other airbrush other than that custom micron, and regulating the air pressure and regulating the paint flow. And that's what I was talking about with using extra color. I was finding that I was getting it to go down to that kind of level. So I think that certain things, I think it's a fundamental fact that certain tools are going to give you certain are going to allow you to create certain effects. But equally, and I agree with you 100%, those tools aren't going to allow you to get those effects if you don't have a base layer of skill to be able to do it in the first place. And you're absolutely right. Drawing the drum analogy, it would be, I'd love to. It'd be great for me to go out and spend, 4,000 quid on a drum workshop kit with all the whistles and bells. That isn't going to make me any better, a better drummer than I am on my, £1,000 kit that I'm playing at the moment. It doesn't matter. It's kind of, it's having all the tools and no ideas, isn't it? It's that kind of idea. And I think that it is important that as kind of people that talk about the hobby and are in the sort of the forefront and in the eyes of other people that come into the hobby, that we explain that you need that fundamental skill before you can get the best of any tools, whether it be a scalpel or whether it be a £500 custom micron or whatever it may well be. So you do need to have that sort of underpinning of skill. And we've talked about this a lot, haven't we, on here? We've sort of said, there's no good you going out and spending, hundreds and hundreds of pounds on, it's a kind of one of the
it's a dichotomy, because there's no point in kind of like going out and buying, he said, ridiculously cheap airbrushes. We've got one here. But there's no point in kind of like going for something that's so cheap that it is just unusable.
I agree.
Likewise, there's no point. And I've seen people do this, and it's like, I'm thinking of buying my first airbrush. What shall I get? And I've actually seen people say, buy a custom micron, and it's like, no, I wouldn't do that either. No. There is a middle ground, you see, and to me, that middle ground is, somebody wants to go out and buy a first airbrush. I would say, okay, go for a Sparmax, a base level Iwata, or if you really want to kind of like have some fun, see what you can do with these little Fender brushes.
Yeah. Well, we have this conversation away from airbrushes, don't we? We often see online and we talk away from the shows about the hobby and the industry and all that sort of stuff. How many times do we see somebody posting on a forum or whatever and saying, I've just bought this, how do I use it? Or I've just bought this kit, and then somebody will reply, well, you need X, Y, and Z to go with it. Completely misunderstanding that the person that's asked that question in the first place is a beginner. And then what happens is that this beginner is offered ideas that are much more advanced in response. We see that a lot, don't we? Oh, well, you need to buy an etch set to go with that, or you need to buy tracks to go with that. You need to do that. You need to. We ought to start a forum going, you don't need to, ... And you get that a lot, don't you? Where there's an obvious kind of beginner asking questions and being people suggesting to them, well, don't go for this. You need to have this, this, and this. And I think the same thing happens with tools as well. You don't want to spend 35 quid on an airbrush. Go out and spend 150 quid. Well, why not learn on the cheaper one? And then if you want to do it and you're developing, then you can kind of move up. Go back to the drumming analogy. If you want to learn drums, go out and spend 350 quid on it.
Yeah. Oysen says, after reading your review of the Fender in the magazine, that was me. Yeah, it was. I was just trying to think, who wrote the review of the Fender? That was me.
Not me.
International. I went out and got one, and the lower cost just made biting the bullet that little bit more tolerable, and now I love it. I'm sure that I eventually upgrade. I may discover it's swear word, but for the moment, it sprays like complaints. And this is the point. We're going to have to wrap up in this second, actually, because I've got to prep for another show in a minute. But we've overshot a bit. But the thing is yes, I have in the past. I have trialed and tested airbrushes for companies, and I did 3. This is about 10 years ago. I did 3. Can you test these out? Let us know what you think about them. All 3 failed within 10 minutes. They just stopped working. They just went completely. I have had experience of horrible, nasty, cheap airbrushes that the moment you pick them up, you think, this is a wrong one. Everything about them. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, this is just going to be a matter of time until this goes wrong, you see. And I will say about the Fenders is that the moment I saw the boxes, the moment I picked them up, the moment I started using them, I thought to myself, yep, they're not Iwatas, they're not harder than Steenbecks, but you know what? These are coming up in the rearview mirror in terms of build quality. They are actually very, very good airbrushes. And so, yeah, I'm not, and also they are not Iwata clones. They really are not Iwata.
No, they really are. We had this, didn't we? I think I put it on my Facebook page. Somebody had said, oh, that's all they did it and everything. And I just put one above the other and said, really? And it's almost like that we've come to that area now where you can only design them in a certain way. There's not much else you can do with an airbrush, is there? It's a bit like redesigning a biro and it being different and somebody saying, well, it's just a Bic clone, isn't it? Not like you do with a plastic tube with an ink filament in the middle. But going on to sort of airbrushes that I know that you loathe with almost subatomic levels of vitriol. Yes, indeed. While I was up in the loft, I found my wooden boxed metal Aztec airbrush, complete with all of its heads, all of its color cups, everything. I'm going to drag it out of the loft, and I'm going to paint an entire model with it, Mr. Jonathan Mark.
There's a reason why it was up in the attic.
I know. I'm going to show it because I used one of those. I told you this. I don't think you believe me, frankly, and I felt slightly hurt by the suggestion that I might have been telling lies. I did actually use this for most of the time that I was with at Military Scale. I used one a lot. It was a bit like Trigger's broom afterwards, because I'd sort of replaced lots of it, like all the the head assemblies and everything. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint an entire model, start to finish, using an Aztec airbrush, to see whether or not it's still possible for me to do so.
Frankly, I'd rather paint a model with Trigger's broom.
Yes.
Right. Look, we're gonna have to rattle through the end here, because well, I'm any other business. Yes, you're now posting these out, aren't you?
Yes, I've packaged them all up today. They're all labelled, enveloped, and they're all going. Anybody that's there may well be a few of these left. I'm not sure at the moment. Not very many, a handful of these. If anybody's watched the video the other day of me spraying that Lancaster wing, some people asked how I went about it and everything. It's all explained in this book. So if you would like a copy of this, check out my my website, and you will find some nonsense in there, which will tell you bits and pieces about it, I suppose. But yeah. So thanks for everybody for supporting that. I will be working on the next one, which is the completion of the one that I actually wrote and designed in October of last year, but sort of put to one side, and that's on the garage diorama. And also, John, before I go, I'd just like to say enigmatically that because I'm currently only working in a part-time capacity for Doolittle, I'm not working. I don't have a full-time position at the as it stands at the moment. I'm hoping to develop what I do online and create a platform that will allow people to see my work in a way that they haven't been able to see it before, and that will include extending the video ideas as well. You and I,
like what we've been telling you to do for the last year, that kind
of
thing.
like what you've been telling me to do. So if anybody follows me in an aircraft capacity, it's not dioramas. I think it's going to be specifically aircraft. So if you are following me specifically in aircraft, this new project, which I'm talking to people that I trust. John is one, Drew is another, people that that sort of know me in the background and everything, and I'm hoping that people will want to follow that project.
I think you need to come down to Ye West Country sometime in the next few weeks, so we can have talks.
Yeah, I think so, and everything.
And so to a model shop.
Yeah, we'll see how I get on, as I've got this Lancaster to do, but right. I'm certainly planning, because I need a job and I don't have one at the moment. If I'm going to carry on with what I'm doing at the moment, if I'm going to carry on with being a model maker and being kind of in the public eye, I need to develop that, and that's what I'm working on at the moment. So sort of fingers crossed that I can do that and carry on. So, yeah.
Any other business?
No, I think that's it. I think that's hopefully. Sorry, Gary. I hope I haven't sort of upset you.
No, please don't upset Gary, because I'm hoping he's going to get in contact with us, and like I said, we'll see what we can do for Inuata Neo.
I think it's one of those. I think it's kind of one of those sort of things, isn't it? That we sort of feel so passionately about what we do and everything that we sort of defend it as much as we can.
I think we're all on the same team. It just needs to kind of like get the harmonies sorted out a bit. Talking of teams, this is the Any Other Business segment. So talking of teams, that Mo Salah goal.
Oh yes, I have to say that I thought that the one against Manchester City was spectacular and goal of the season already. The one against Watford probably was like, here you go, Mo Salah from 3 weeks ago. Hold Mo Salah's beer, and we'll see whether we can run through any other defence. And I have to say as well, too, because I was at Ewood Park yesterday watching Coventry City. Well done to Coventry City after playing like drains in the first half to fight back from 2-0 down to draw 2-2. And to everybody that was there, it was literally the most bonkers I've ever seen a crowd when the when the equalising goal went in. I've literally never seen anything like it in a.
You say playing like drains. I mean, there's playing like drains, and then there's being 2-0 up against Wolverhampton Wanderers with 10 minutes to go and losing a match 3-2. I'm looking at you, Aston Villa.
I have to say, very funny. I've got to say that,
funny.
and also. At the risk of upsetting everybody, well done, Ronaldo, for making Manchester United a much better football club since you arrived.
Absolutely.
From all of us in the rest of the Premier League, we thank you.
Also, Dale from Hornby has just messaged me to say, can we get a copy of Spencer's book, please, for a competition?
Yes.
Okay, I'll talk about that offline then. But yes, there you go, Dale. You can have a copy of the book.
I think I've probably got a spare one.
You can have my copy. You can. I'm donating my copy.
No, I'll have one. He can kind of send out. So that's that's not a problem at all. Let's do that.
Gary, if you can message us. Well, I'm in the market for an Iwata Neo, so put some business your way, quite frankly. So I think that's it. It's been a busy old week, and there's still other kits, new releases that we need to talk about at some stage. Like, for example, somebody's doing a Junkers. Brain's gone dead here, but it's a who's that company that the stuff looks like Novo kits? The boxes. No, lost it. Micromere doing a Junkers, is it a 287 or something? It's very interesting though. But
right, cool. Also, did you see? I've seen I no doubt want to talk about it. I don't know if you've already talked about it, but I thought that the photographs that have come out about Zvezda's T62 looked interesting as well. That was quite nice.
Yeah, we'll probably cover that as and when Junkers 388. That was it. We'll probably cover that as and when it passes our palms anyway, and hopefully very, very soon I might be getting hold of my little French strange truck thing whatever it's called, the Laughly.
The Laughly, that's kind of a cool thing, isn't it? So
Anyway, look, we are literally out of time. I'd like to say thank you to Spencer for joining us tonight. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. And sorry we can't read out your names, but you're absolutely sterling for putting up with us this evening, especially as Journey to the Far Side of the Sun was on tonight. I mean, I know what I honestly, if I hadn't been doing that, I've been watching that. So I've got it on Blu-ray. That's not the point.
They won't want to watch it all.
I want to watch it.
Yes.
Anyway, on that note, thank you, Spencer. Thank you, everybody else. We will be back for the midweek one. Until then, stay safe, stay out of trouble, and we'll see you very, 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 very soon. Bye for now.